One of the easiest things you can do to make your commander deck stronger is by increasing the amount of cards you draw during a game of Commander. And in this video, I want to show you 10 cards, 2 from each color that are less than $1 that'll draw you multiple cards over the course of the game without being high target for your opponents. So I'm not going to talk about cards like Ristic Study. Those are going to be high targets, they're going to be destroyed often. But these are more secretive cards that are going to stay in play and draw you multiple cards over the course of the game and help you win through your game plan. First up is Mangaria the Diplomat. It's a legendary creature, human cleric for 4 mana, 2/4 with lifelink. Whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you and or planeswalkers you control, draw a card. Whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, draw a card. This thing just sits in play. It can go in any mono white deck or any deck that has white. It can gain you a little bit of life. But as your opponents just do things they're normally going to do, like cast 2 spells in a turn, you get to draw a card. It doesn't harm your opponents in any way, so it's not really going to be a big target of your opponents. But if something attacks the 2 or more creatures, you can draw a card. If your opponents have things that are little 1/1s or 2/2 creatures that they get a benefit for doing combat damage, you could let them deal the combat damage to you because you can trade a little bit of life for drawing more cards. And that is why I think this Diplomat is a great white card that can draw you multiple cards over the course of the game. And at this moment, the Bloomburrow Commander version is only 69 cents. The next white card I want to talk about is Fey Steed for white, and 2. It's a creature elk 4/4. Whenever it attacks, another target attacking creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn. Whenever a creature or planeswalker you control becomes a target of a spell and ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. Your creatures are going to become the target of spells or abilities your opponents control just over the course of the game naturally. They're going to feel inclined to destroy your commander. They're going to feel inclined to return your stuff to your hand. The abilities could put --/ counters on them. They might want to enchant them with things that turn them into elks themselves. It's just a 4/4 that makes another attacking creature indestructible. So maybe they need to destroy it before you go to attack. But if you never attack with this card and you just draw a couple cards over the course of the game, you're going to be in a good spot. And this card says you may draw a card. So if you're playing against a Nekusar deck or a deck that's going to punish you for drawing cards like Shieldren, this is a good card that has the May ability. But when you're playing against those decks, they're going to have black in them, they're going to have blue in them, they're going to have red in them. Your creatures are going to get murdered, they're going to get bounced, and they're going to get lightning bolted. This is a good card that can get something indestructible and draw you some cards. Going into blue, I have Curiosity Crafter, another card from Bloomburrow. 4 mana, 3/3 flying. You have no max hand size. Whenever a creature token you control does combat damage to a player, draw a card. Now this is one of the cards on this list that can get really out of hand. If you're attacking with 2, 3, 4 creature tokens in your blue-white deck that has a bunch of birds laying around, a blue-green deck that has a bunch of little guys running around, landfall-type creatures running around, you're going to be drawing a lot of cards, and this is probably going to draw attention to itself. But if you play this pre-combat and then move to attack and attack with 4 tokens that all deal 1/1s combat damage, you're going to draw 4 cards, and 4 cards for 4 mana is a great deal. It's not a big flashy card. It does not harm your opponent. It only helps move your game plan along by drawing you more cards and letting you get to the cards that are going to finish the game or deal with the threat in play. I think it's important to have these kinds of cards in your deck that don't advance your game plan, but don't harm your game plan either. They advance your game plan by letting you get to the cards you need, but this card does not help you win faster. It definitely doesn't harm your opponents from winning. And so because it doesn't stop your opponents from winning, they're probably not going to target it. They're going to focus on the enchantments and artifacts and creatures in play that are slowing down their game plan. Another card that does not harm your game plan and does not slow your opponents down is Curse of Verbosity. For 3 mana, it's an enchantment or a curse. Enchant player. Whenever enchanted player is attacked, you may draw a card. It's actually just draw a card. Each opponent attacking that player does the same. Whenever the enchanted player is attacked, you draw a card, and each opponent attacking the creature does the same. It's good because it lets you draw cards over the course of the game, and your opponents are going to want to draw cards too, so they're going to be attacking that player, which gets that player out of the way for you, and it lets you draw cards just over the course of the game naturally. Again, you can use your opponents having little 1/1 tokens laying around or a 3/3 from the Beast Within and go, yeah, if you attack my opponent, you get to draw a card, and you get to draw a card too. And it just helps your hand get full over the course of the game, and this enchantment does not call attention to itself like Ristic Study would. This card's probably going to draw less cards than Ristic Study would, but this is not going to draw attention to itself, and it's just going to sit there and generate value over the course of the game for you. Harvester of Souls going into black is a 6-mana 5/5 creature demon Death Touch. Whenever another non-token creature dies, you may draw a card. That's any non-token creature. It does not just have to be yours. And you don't need to just think, I'm not playing a sacrifice deck, so I'm not going to play this card. Over the course of the game, your opponents are going to attack you or attack each other, and their 4/4s are going to trade, and their 5/5s are going to have a combat trick put on them and they're going to die. Just over the course of the game and over the course of multiple combats, creatures are going to die. They always do. Commanders have to be removed. Board wipes are going to happen. Everyone plays games where like 7 board wipes happen. It's a bunch of crap. But this card will just draw you multiple cards over the course of the game. And it's a little bit of board wipe protection because this is in play and your opponent board wipes. You're going to draw a ton of cards and just refill your hand. And sure, you're probably going to draw more than 7 cards and you have to discard a couple cards out of your hand, but you're going to keep the best ones. And honestly, if you're playing black, you probably want some of those cards in your graveyard anyway. You can just reanimate them with those kind of spells. So this card is a bigger thing. It's a big threat. It's a 5/5. It's 5/5 with Death Touch, which is kind of funny. It's a big creature that also has Death Touch, but it can deal with big commanders like Ghalta. And I think it's a good card that's a little bit of board wipe protection. Your opponents might want to play around it and not let you draw a bunch of cards. They might have some thought about that. But I think this is a good card that's under $1 that can draw you multiple cards over the course of a game. Another card that's going to draw you cards just for doing what you already wanted to do. Whenever 1 or more +1/+ encounters are put on this creature, you may draw 2 cards. If you do, lose 2 life. And it has the adaptability. So if for some reason your deck is not already putting +1/+ encounters on them, because that's the kind of deck you're going to want to put this in, you could pay some mana and get that going. Everyone knows that in those +1/+ encounter decks, you have to have things that trigger off of putting +1/+ encounters on things. But you can have 3 doubling effects in play. But if you don't have any +1/+ encounters coming onto your creatures and none of your effects are going to trigger, you can't double 0 that many times. It's not going to be that interesting. This is the way that if you don't have anything going on, you can put some counters on it, draw some cards, and draw into those cards are going to put more +1/+ encounters on things. Now, this card does have the drawback of losing you 2 life, but it's also a really budget card. This thing is 1 cent on TCG Player. It's going to draw you multiple cards for doing what you're already doing, and you're going to reward your deck for doing what it wants to be doing. And it wants to be putting +1/+ encounters on things. You're going to play this in a black-green +1/+ encounter deck, and an Abzan +1/+ encounter deck. In a black-red +1/+ encounter, maybe leave it into a Mass or Orc type decks. You're not going to play this in any deck, but in those decks, it's going to draw you a lot of cards. It's going to draw you cards over the course of the game, and you can control it because it says you may draw 2 cards. So if your life total is less than 20, less than 10, and you just want to stop, bleeding, but you're drawing cards, you can stop bleeding. Going into red does not really draw cards in the traditional sense that all the other colors do. It draws cards by exiling things. And I think Virtue of Courage is a good card that can exile things and let you cast a bunch of cards and essentially draw cards. It has an adventure, which we'll talk about first. For 2 mana, deals 2 damage to any target. You can get rid of a Scavenging Ooze before they have time to trigger it if you're playing an exile. You don't want exile against your strategy. You're playing a graveyard deck. It can also deal 2 damage to like a Llanowar Elf and get that out of play. A Thyssus early in the game before they've triggered it. But the enchantment side, whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, you may exile that many cards from the top of your library. You may play those cards this turn. Again, red does not draw cards in the traditional sense that blue or green or white might. It just has you exile and be able to play those cards. But if your deck's playing red, you're going to be dealing non-combat damage to your opponents. You're going to be lightning bolting. You're going to be punishing them for doing things. You're going to have your creatures come into play. You're going to punish them in an Ekisar deck by having them lose life whenever they draw cards. You're going to have them draw extra cards. This is just a way that your deck's, again, already doing what it wants to be doing. And you're just going to get more value off of being able to do that and further your game plan in those non-combat type decks. Like if you have a Torbrand deck and you're board wiping, those effects don't really have draw a card attached to them. This is a way to keep the momentum going and keep being able to remove your problematic opponent permanents without slowing down your game plan. Another deck-specific red card that can draw you multiple cards over the course of a game. Whenever a modified creature you control attacks, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. And whenever you cast a spell from exile, you may put a +1/+ encounter on target creature you control. Equipment, auras, and counters are modifications. If you're playing a green-red +1/+ encounter deck, you can build this card in there and draw a couple extra cards. If you're playing an equipment deck, you can draw a couple extra cards. If you're playing a Naya Enchantress deck, you can draw a couple extra cards. And just having access to extra things and having choices is what makes some commander decks better than other ones. And having those choices is what's going to make your deck function better than your opponent's, because you're always going to have choices and options to deal with your opponent's threats. And if your hand's getting low, you're not going to continue to have threats, and you're not going to continue to have ways to push the damage through to finish the game. Coming into green, a card from Scourge is Primitive Etchings. It's an enchantment that says reveal the first card you draw each turn. Whenever you reveal a creature card this way, draw a card. In your green decks, you're probably going to be playing a lot of creatures, Llanowar Elves, 6/6s, Ghaltas, big creatures like that, and being able to have extra cards come into play, revealing the first card you draw each turn, especially if you're not playing blue, probably doesn't really matter. If you don't care to reveal the counter spells, and even revealing that you have counter spells is good in the game in the course of Commander, because it might slow your opponents down, and it gives the entire table more understanding of what's happening. They don't have to burn their counter spells whenever you have mana up if they know you have it. And if you reveal a creature card, you get to draw an extra card. It's a good little enchantment. There are green decks that care about having enchantments in play, and there are obviously decks that don't want to have non-creature permanents, and so you just void this card. This is a good budget card that can draw you extra cards over the course of the game without being a real threat. This card is not slowing down your opponents or stopping their strategy or harming them in any shape or form, and so it can just sit there and generate value over the course of the game. Another card is Shaper's Sanctuary. It's an enchantment for 1 green from Ixalan. Whenever a creature you control becomes a target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. It's just like the Elk we talked about earlier, but your creatures are going to become the target of the spells and abilities your opponents control over the course of the game. They're going to bounce them, they're going to destroy them, and you can get this down really early in a game of Commander and probably draw 2, 3, 4 cards off of it. There are lots of cards in Commander that are creatures that tap to do something to your opponent's creatures. Destroy a tapped creature, the Assassin card. There are things that bounce back to your hand by tapping and activating. There are cards that if you put plus counters on your stuff and your opponent's stuff, you generate value off of them, so your opponents are going to put a plus counter on your thing. You're going to get to draw extra cards over the course of the game because of that. Which of these 10 cards is your favorite? You let me know your thoughts in the comments below.